Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Adi Klevit here, the host of the System Simplified podcast, where I feature top founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And today's episode is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group, where we create, document, improve, and implement processes and procedures so businesses can grow and thrive. I'm really honored to introduce today's guest, John Ruhlin. Hi, John.
Hey there.
How are you?
I'm excited to be hanging with you this morning. I love when people are talking about systematizing things, because what we talk about is very rarely systematized. So this should be a good conversation.
Absolutely. And I'm excited to have you on this podcast because I love your book and I love your approach to the book is Giftology, so I don't keep people in mystery, and I'm going to give you the whole bio, but it's one of my favorite books. I mean, I love your concepts, and there are some things there. I mean, I agree with what you say there, but there are some things that go like, oh, finally somebody is actually saying it, which is incredible. But before we start, I need to give a shout out to Chad Gill. I would love to give a shout out rather to Chad Gill, who introduced us. So Chad has a company called Laminin Coaching, and he provides incredible resources to contractors in terms of virtual assistants, in terms of offloading the load of work, in terms of finding people that can help the business owners, help with estimating, help with virtual assisting, you name it. You should definitely check out the episodes I did with Chad, which were amazing, the podcast episodes, and also his website, which is going to be in the show notes. So thank you, Chad, for the introduction. And now I'm going to introduce you, John, and I'm going to start asking you tons of questions because this is my opportunity to do so after reading the book. All right. So you're the world's leading authority in maximizing customer loyalty through radical generosity, which is amazing, right? So you're the founder and the author of Giftology, and you've been featured in Fox News, Forbes, Fast Company, Inc., and New York Times, and now on the System Simplified podcast. Just kidding.
True, got to add that to the bio.
Have to add it. Please do. Okay. So while becoming the number one performer out of 1.5 million sales reps for one of the world's most recognizable brands, you develop a system of using generosity to gain access to elite clients and generate thousands of referrals. You and your firm now help automate this process for individuals and organizations like UBS, Raymond James, D.R. Horton, Keller Williams, and the Chicago Cubs, and Caesar's Palace. But the truth is, it also applies to smaller companies. And I know that I use it, Chad uses your system. I know other entrepreneurs that use your system, and it works for big companies, but it also works for a small company, and it's a company.
Even better, actually. It works even better for small to mid-sized companies.
I think so too.
And we'll talk about why.
Yeah, totally. So that's very good. So you and the Giftology team can help any individual turn their clients into their own personal sales force to drive exponential growth. And I think it's amazing, John, because I can tell you that, like, for my own analysis of my own leads, I mean, referrals is the number one, it's the best source of leads, honestly, because you get more customers like the ones you have, or you develop those relationships, and anything that can help develop relationships is a wonderful thing.
Yeah. Referrals is everything. It's amazing how much gold is sitting underneath people's feet that they have not mined. They love Facebook ads. They love all networking and conferences and masterminds, and those are all cool. I do all those things, but I do all the mastermind type stuff and coaching. But referrals is everything. It's the lifeblood of most organizations.
Absolutely, and you can get referrals also from referral partners, not just clients. So that's where the networking comes in, and then you nurture it. Absolutely. Well, we have in common, we have Chad Gilbert, we have another person in common, which is Cameron Herold, which I interviewed for my podcast twice. Love Cameron, he's amazing.
He's incredible.
I love the story that you have to tell about Cameron. So would you mind sharing that with us, how you met Cameron and how you actually, developed that relationship that you now have with Cameron?
Yeah, well, Cameron now has written 7 or 8 books. He's he's the CEO Whisper. He's one of the top business coaches for mid-sized companies, YPO, EO, those kind of organizations. When I heard him speak, I was like, man, I want this guy. And I think everybody, has had that moment where they're like, if I could just get this one person as a client, as a mentor, as an advisor, to speak into my life. Maybe that's a pillar in your industry. Maybe that's an influencer. Maybe that's a supplier. We all have those relationships where you're like, I need them to really believe in me beyond just a transactional relationship. And when I saw Cameron speak, that's how I felt. It was like, I want him in my corner. And his coaching's 10, 20 grand a month. I can't afford that. This is 16 years ago. So I just joined EO, heard him speak, and I found out that he loved Brooks Brothers. He's going to be coming to speak. And I was like, hey, do you want to go to dinner and a ball game? And I was thinking he was going to be excited about it. And his response was super underwhelming. He's like, I don't really, I guess I'll go. I don't have anything else going on. So long story short is I found out what a shirt size was. And I went and bought everything in the fall collection of Brooks Brothers, all the jackets, suits, belts, pants, shoes, everything, and outfitted his Ritz-Carlton room to look like a Brooks Brothers store. It was $7,000 of clothes. My partner, who's the CFO, thinks I'm crazy. He basically said, John, if this doesn't work, which I don't think it's going to work, all of that money comes out of your personal drawer. So I was putting my own money. It wasn't the company money. It was my own money on the line. And Cameron, when he got in, you could tell it was one of those travel days where he just wants to go to bed. He didn't want to go to dinner. And he went to his room, came back down, his eyes were this big. And he said, John, whatever you want to talk about, for as long as you want to talk about it, I'm all ears. I've never had anybody treated me this way. And so I continued to pour into that relationship for probably a decade. And, it was maybe, it's a lot of money. It's 25 grand. And people are like, dude, why did you keep pouring into that relationship? You had him at the Brooks Brothers. And I said, I wanted to show up for him. And most people measure ROI. Hey, I put $1 into a Facebook ad, I get $2 back out. That relationship, I like to measure ROR, which is return on relationship. The reason Cameron went out and became my sales rep, if I wanted to hire him as a sales rep for a year, it cost me $1 million. But Cameron went out and made sure that my first 10, 20, 30, 40, $50,000 speaking gigs weren't because of a bureau or a fancy website. They were because Cameron told the event planner, the CEO, you have to hire John Ruhlin. So that relationship produced 7 figures. And so you do the math, that's a 50x ROR. There's no 25 grand will get you, a decent assistant for half a year. I got Cameron in my corner, one of the most prestigious business coaches in the world, selling on my behalf, wanting to see me win. And because of that, 50x, most of the time people undervalue, under-index relationships. It's usually relationships that make a business rise or fall. It's not Facebook ads or a fancy website, it's humans. And how you show up for those humans. You don't have to invest 25 grand. But most people, they'll spend 25 grand on a mastermind or 25 grand on sponsorship or Facebook ads, and they don't even think twice about it. Even a small company doing a few $1 million. But when you can invest in relationships and get them to inspire to go act on your behalf, amazing doors can be opened that you could never pry open with any sort of marketing. And that's really the crux. Nobody cares about gifts. What we do care about is growing relationships that oftentimes drives our revenue. And that Cameron was that was one of the early stories where it was I need to do this more often. I was risky. It could have blown up in my face, but Cameron to this day still takes pictures on first class or private jets in the Brooks Brothers outfits from 16 years ago, saying, John, I'm thinking about it. Not because my logo's on anything. It's because of how I showed up for him and how I built that relationship.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You mentioned your logo was not on it, and that's one of your principles that I learned, which is amazing, right? So let's explain to the listeners, what do you mean by that? Your logo was not on. Obviously your logo was not on the Brooks Brothers.
Yeah.
I see you putting your logo in one of the suits, but no. But You know, that is one of your principles that I learned that I never thought about before. And I stopped doing it the way I was doing it before. But the principle is really be there for the client, right? I mean, give a gift that is meaningful. So explain about the logo.
Yeah, I mean, large companies do it, but small companies do too. Like you think about like when most people think about gifting or generosity, what they're really saying is I want to give swag or promotional products or some sort of tchotchke. And people do things in business they'd never do in their personal life. Like you'd never go to your best friend's wedding and on the beautiful Tiffany's vase, you know, like simplified systems or compliments of Funnel Hacker or compliments of UBS. Like that'd be cheesy, right? It'd be tacky. When you give something to even to your employees, people are like, John, I'm really generous to my employees. I'm like, tell me about it. I'm like, wow, we give really nice Lululemon jackets, you know, and I'm like, what, you know, are they branded? And they're like, oh yeah, we put our logo right on the chest. I'm like, you didn't give a gift. They're like, what are you talking about? Yeah, we did. It was like $300. And I'm like, no, you gave a really nice uniform to your employees.
Advertising, yeah, like a walking billboard. Yeah.
If you think about your clients, the reason you want to put your logo on it is you want to, whether you realize it or not, you're trying to manipulate them into being a billboard for your brand. That doesn't feel like nobody's going to feel emotionally connected to you. Like that's people think, oh, I'm going to give great swag. Like that's how I'm going to get my brand out there. But when you give it to your best clients, your best employees, your referral partners, they receive it, whether they tell you or not. The likelihood of them loving it and wearing it all the time is like 1%. Most of the time they'll wear it once a year or they'll give it to Goodwill or their spouse, you know, throws it away. Like when you put your logo on something, you take it from being maybe a gift, maybe I like the word artifact, but you put it into a category of business. And we all know that our best employees, our best clients, our best referral partners, our mentors, we know we've crossed from being business to personal when they invite you where? To their home. And you break bread with them in their home, with their kids, their family. And we all want that deeper relationship with our clients, with our employees, with our partners. But we don't do things like when you put a logo on something and give it to somebody, that's swag. I don't care if it's a Rolex. Like I've had people give like Domino's, the pizza joint, gave Rolexes to their franchises. Guess what happened? Even a $10,000, $15,000 watch, you'd be like, oh, that's an amazing gift. On the white airface can of the watch was the Domino's logo. What happened? They traded them in. Because even if you work for Domino's, do you really want Domino's on your Rolex? Mm-mm. The answer is no. And so people think they're going to get their brand out there and they're getting all these impressions. But there's a difference between giving somebody a polo shirt with your logo on it. The impression is you want me to be a billboard for you. That is not how you get more referrals. The way you get more referrals is to show up for that person powerfully and generously and inspire them to talk about you. You give. Now, if I gave you a Rolex, would I have to put my logo on it to remind you where it came from? No, right? Like, so if you give world-class artifacts that are personalized to them, like the Brooks Brothers, 16 years later, every single day that Cameron uses it for 16 years, so he's had thousands of thoughts of John Ruhlin subconsciously, whether he realized it or not, because of what I gave him and the way I gave it to him. And so the
logo, it also
becomes
a piece of conversation, because if you give me, let's say you gave me a Rolex and people go, wow, this is a great watch. Yes, John Ruhlin gave it to me. So now, John, by the way, you have to send me a Rolex.
You're going to tell the story. You get excited to tell the story of where it came from. And so that's the thing that people are like, John, gifting doesn't matter. I'm like, no, gifting doesn't matter. But we all have room for artifacts that have a story and meaning tied to them. And when you give those types of things, that's why, like, you know, our history is with Cutco, the knife company. People are like, dude, like the knives are silly. And I'm like, the knives are silly, but guess what people do when they get together with their loved ones, whether they make $50,000 a year or $50 million a year? They get their friends, family, kids, grandkids, loved ones, and they gather in the kitchen, whether you're in Idaho, Africa, Austria, I don't care where you're at. You gather with your loved ones in the kitchen and you break bread. And what do you typically use? A silly knife. Now, I sent Cameron the full $12,000 knife set. There was no Giftology, John Ruhlin on there. It was his quotes from his books. It was his family name. Now, every time he's picking those silly knives up, they're handmade, they're New York, they're awesome. But he could go buy his own knife set. But when he saw his own quotes of wisdom on there and his name on it, now it's an heirloom. And every single time he uses those tools, for the next 50 years, he's triggered and there's no logo involved because I made it all about him. And so people think they do giftology. They're like, John, I do giftology. I'm like, tell me the recipe. And they're like, well, we give this really cool swag and we do this and we put our logo on it. I'm like, you didn't do giftology. Don't expect don't expect 50x ROR if you don't follow the recipe. And that's where people, big, small, solopreneurs, I don't care what you're selling, if you don't follow the recipe, don't expect the results.
Absolutely. And we're going to go over that recipe. But first, I love the story that you tell about how you got started, like, the change of mind, the shift in your viewpoint and what you learned. I believe that was Paul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was my so people think they have a hard time selling coaching or virtual assistants. I interned with Cutco, straight off the farm. I grew up milking goats on a farm, so I had no real sales experience. No high end. Like I grew up, my mom was a garage sales shopper. Like she could make $5 go further than most people could make $500. So I wore hand-me-downs and thrift store. So when I interned with Cutco, I pitched my girlfriend's dad, Paul, the knives, which is, it's a weird conversation, pitching your girlfriend's dad knives, right? Like that's weird. But Paul didn't make me feel weird. And one of the reasons I pitched him on my 4th appointment with Cutco was he was the deal maker in town. He owned a law firm. But everybody seemed to come his direction. Like all the good ideas, all the opportunities. And part of the reason I noticed was when you're poor, you notice when people are generous. He was always giving things away. He'd find a deal on noodles. He'd buy a semi-load. Everybody at church the next Sunday walks away with like a year's supply. And as a 20-year-old, this is 24 years ago, I'm doing the math. I'm like, Paul, that was 40 grand on noodles. Like, what are you doing? And he's like, I just love showing up for people this way. So I pitch him the knives. He buys a set for himself and his 3 unmarried daughters. That's just how Paul was. Just super generous. Came back to me. He's like, John, I want to help you hit your goals, but what else can I buy? So I'm doing my wheels are spinning. I'm like, all of his clients are like financial advisors, insurance companies, lumber yards, home builders. It's the Midwest, right? It's in Ohio. And they're all dudes in that industry, $1 million companies to maybe $200 million companies. And they're all into hunting, fishing, and the outdoors, grilling, whatever else. So I'm like, maybe Paul will have mercy on me and order 100 of the pocket knives that are a few $100s each. And so I work up the courage for church on a Sunday morning. Hey, Paul, what do you think? And he's like, I don't want to order the pocket knives. And I'm kind of, deflated. I'm like, he's like, but I do want to order something. I'm like, what's that? He's like, I want to order 100 of the paring knives. In my head, like kind of this like deer in the headlights look like, kitchen tools for like a bunch of dudes that are into hunting. Like, I don't get it. And he said, John, the reason I have more referrals, deal flow, access, all these things you want, all the results we want in business, I figured out a simple truth 35 years ago when I started the firm. And that's if you take care of the family in business, everything else seems to take care of itself. So for me, it was like a master class, like people love Robert Cialdini's books. I quote them all the time about influence and persuasion. Paul was living it of like, how do you like build reciprocity with a relationship? Well, you pour into it with no strings attached, and you take care of people's what we now call the inner circle and all of these different things. It wasn't about the stupid knives. It was about what that represented to the relationship. And oh, by the way, like people will use it once a day minimum for the next 10 years. That's 3,600 times they're thinking about Paul. He knew that. He was smart. Like he understood the kitchen is the hub. The kitchen is where you want to get into. And so I started to mimic that. I'd buy carving sets and whatever else. And by the time I was a senior in college, Cutco's worked with, now the numbers are bigger. It's 2.5 million, but at the time it was 1.5 million. We became the #1 rep in the history of the company out of 75 years by applying what I now call giftology and rich relationships. And it was all because of modeling things that I saw early on with Paul. And I just systematized it. I just made it consistent and a process that people could follow. And so I was getting ready to go to med school. I put med school on hold and went all in on this entrepreneurial thing. And that was 24 years ago. But Paul I give him a lot of credit in the book because a lot of the things that I systematized, he just was living. It wasn't a tactic for him. It was just a lifestyle. It was a heart set. It was who he was. And I was like, I want to be Paul when I'm 60, I'm 20. So I'm going to start doing this, this generosity thing.
Absolutely. And, and I think what you said there is very important, that he was really living it, and you have to be genuine. You can't just fake it, you know? You really have to want to give, and you have to want to help people. And I think that's what it is. It's like really seeing and really understanding what people's needs are. Like, for instance, when you mention, don't gift consumables, right? I mean, I think that is so important because, like, for me, for instance, I have food allergies, I have a very strict diet, but then when I get, like, somebody invested so much money in like a box of chocolate that then I cannot even eat, and I have to find who to give it to. And
you have gift guilt. They created an obligation and a burden. Like, you gifted guilt, shame, and a burden to somebody. You spent money to shame and burden your most valuable relationship. Not a good. And to your point of like making it genuine, I tell people from the stage all the time, like, if you're a douchebag and you give really thoughtful gifts, it just amplifies that you're trying to manipulate and you're a douchebag. Like, it doesn't. You need to be the kind of person that shows up for relationships in all areas, not just with gifting or artifacts. Because if you don't, people will read between the lines. If you give something and then are pissed that you don't get something back, it wasn't a gift. It was a give to get. It was a manipulation. And so there are people that will model what we're talking about or try to steal the recipe. I'm like, I give the recipe away for free. But they forget the one ingredient is who they are, who they're being matters along with what you're doing. So it's not like, you can be this horrendous person and give thoughtful gifts and magically it covers everything. Like, that's not how humans work.
No, I agree with you. That's why, when people ask me, okay, what's your process of writing processes? I've done many, many webinars and go over my process. I don't have a problem with it because it will work, but it will work if you really have an understanding and you really have the knowledge and you really want to help. So I agree that, you have to have different components. It's not just the mechanics on how to do it. But, for our listeners that haven't heard or read Giftology, which they should, let's go over the recipe, just the main points, and then we can discuss. I'll ask you some questions about the individual points of the recipe. But if you had to give me the recipe in an outline, what would that be?
Well, if I can, before I give the outline, sometimes people want just some tips and tricks, right? They just want, like, how can I make an immediate impact tomorrow? Like, what are the things to avoid doing, or what are the things? Because sometimes people just don't know, right? They just look around and see what everybody's doing, and are like, I guess I should be doing that because that's what my mentor did, or that's what, like, this other company that's twice or 10 times my size does. And so I do.
I know what one of them are. One of them is do not send the gifts regularly on anniversaries.
Yes.
Days, because that's just like what everybody else does. So what do you do instead?
Yeah, so so no ABC gifting is one of them. So the top 10 worst gifts to avoid giving, your audience can go download the 10 worst gifts and an explanation for, you mentioned one of them, which is food or consumables, but they go to The Givers with an S, The Givers Edge, thegiversedge.com and download, and then we explain why. And so food is on there for the food allergies is one of the reasons. They could be on a diet, maybe they're, any number of things. The other reason is you spend $50 on chocolate or $100 on a basket of peanut brittle or whatever the food item is. How many impressions do you get from it? Even if they loved it, you get one. So people are like, John, your knives or your artifacts are more expensive. I don't want to spend $500. I'm like, well, in marketing, you measure impressions, like positive impressions, right? You get one impression for $50. My gift or artifacts that I recommend might be $300, so 6 times more. But within that first year, if they use it once a day, like the knives, that's 365 impressions in 1 year versus one. So 365 times more they're going to think about the relationship. And we want more referrals. Well, referrals come when you're liked. A lot of people don't have an issue with being liked. Trusted, you're good at what you do. But the third one is being top of mind. Most people are barraged with what? Text message, Facebook message, TikTok. They have family stuff, they have business stuff. Their brain is overwhelmed. And so most people don't get referrals because they're not top of mind. And the only way you can be top of mind is to integrate in with their life, or you're talking to them every day. But most people aren't talking to their clients and employees and partners and referral sources every day. They might talk to them once a month or once a quarter. So the top of mind element, when you're talking about like things like alcohol, is the same way.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people are sober or aren't drinking for a season. You send them like $100 bottle of bourbon or wine or whatever. First off, you get one impression, maybe a few if it's a bottle of bourbon, but it's 5-10 impressions at most. And that's if they love it. I would much rather give something to somebody as a marketer and as an entrepreneur that doesn't have an unlimited budget. I need to find ways I can compete with the guys that are 100 times my size. Well, one of the ways you can do it is by giving something that's physical and not consumable. So gift cards are on there. So that whole list, your audience can go download, but there's a reason to it. Like there's a strategy to it. And it's not spend more money. It's take the marketing, biz dev, relationship, sponsorship, advertising dollars that all of the businesses that we work with have, and just spend it more creatively and more thoughtfully than your bigger competitors. If you do that, there's companies that I compete with that are in the multi-billion-dollar industry, and we destroy them when we go head to head. Not because I have more money to spend; they have more budget. But our strategies and thoughtfulness and creativity, they just want to cut a check. And I'm like, fine, you got $5 million budget. I don't have a $5 million budget. I have 1/10 that, but I'm going to win. And the reason I'm going to win is because I'm more thoughtful and creative with those dollars. And so that's the crux of the overarching thing. Like, it's not a gifting. It's more of like, what's your relationship plan? And then how do you deploy the dollars? So like we talked about, no logos, that's part of the deal. It needs to be personalized to them. Always with a handwritten note. Like, don't send it from Amazon. You don't, like, when you think about a relationship, even the Rolex example, unless I put a handwritten note with it to talk about the meaning, the thoughtfulness, the story of why I'm giving you that artifact, it just looks like I'm trying to like bribe you or spend a bunch of money with no real meaning or story. So the handwritten note is actually more important than the thing.
Right.
Inner circle. If we're developing on the agency side, if somebody says, hey, John, I have all these clients or employees I want to send really thoughtful gifts to, my question is always, do you know the inner circle? Of course, they're like, what does that mean? I said, do you know their spouse's name or significant other? Do you know their team, their assistant, their event planner, their chief of staff? Do you know their kids' names, and do you know their pets' names? When we put together a relationship plan, 80% of the budget is not directed at the employee or at the client. It's directed at their inner circle. And here's why. You know in the book, but most of the time, the executive, the decision maker, the employee gets treated like gold. They get nice trips, first class, they're staying at the Four Seasons. Guess who doesn't get the nice things? Usually their spouse. The spouse has to hold down the fort. They're at home. Their assistant doesn't get treated that way. So if you want to be able to invest and get a bigger return on relationship, you have to take care of the people around the people. And when you honor and get that person, like the amount of deals we've helped clients get and referrals didn't come because of what they were doing for their referral source. It happened because their referral source's spouse couldn't stop talking about the relationship because of how they felt, because they were included for the first time ever in business. So that inner circle, Paul was magic with this. He treated the receptionist the same way he treated the CEO. He just did it naturally. He treated the assistant, janitor, didn't matter. That's just how he treated humans. But I think that most of the time people think, oh, I want to take care of all my CEO clients or the CFO or whoever cuts the check. And I'm like, you're dumb. You don't understand. Like, they get treated this way by all your competitors. But nobody is taking care of their spouse. Nobody's taking care of their pets. Nobody's taking care of their kids. And that's how you can deploy $1 and have it feel like you deployed $1,000 or $10,000, is that inner circle. And then the last thing I'll just talk about is time. You alluded to this. We say no ABC gifting, no anniversaries, no birthdays, no Christmas. When you give a gift at think about a marriage. If I show up for my wife on Valentine's Day or on her birthday, I don't get any bonus points. Like, I'm her husband. Those are expected. If you take care of a client at Christmas, guess what? So did 75 of your competitors. The conference table is ready to collapse from all the candy, nuts, bourbon. Even a Rolex shows up and it's one of 50 packages. It just feels like noise. So we say you need to show up for relationships with intentionality, and we call it planned randomness. I'll take somebody's top 50 clients and top 75 employees and top 20 referral partners, and we'll map out here's the 3 times per year we're going to send a gift, and it's not tied to a date on a calendar. You don't tie it, like the amount of people that want to do referral programs with us, I'm like, you don't do referral gifts. And they're like, well, I want to say thank you. I'm like, great, write a note, say thank you. If somebody gives you like a $50,000 referral for a project and you send them a $500 bottle of wine, what did you just turn that relationship into? You turned it into a transactional tit for tat relationship. Whereas if you showed up for that relationship as just because I was thinking of you, now the person's like, I didn't do a deal. I didn't send a referral. It's not my birthday. Why'd you send this? Just because you were thinking of me? That relationship flourishes because you did it with intention, not because you had to. That goes back to the Cameron example. There was no date on the calendar. I showed up for him for 10 years just because of the relationship. And that's where most people, like, they have an event, they have a conference. I'm like, don't do gifts at events or conferences. Everybody gives swag bags. Even a nice gift given out en masse at an event like that just feels like noise. Take those same relationships when you're not getting FaceTime with them and plan out and show up for those relationships. And so the timing of what you're sending matters just as much, if not more, than what the physical thing is. So people think, I'm going to give Apple, I'm going to give Bose, I'm going to give, Amazon gift cards. I'm like, first off, those are all overdone. Everybody does those. But you give them at the same expected obligatory time, like Christmas or at a conference, and you lose all of the gravitas and the weightiness of it because you gave it at an expected obligatory time. So the timing is crucial.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I've done it with one of my good connections, but it was real. Again, it's the fact of being genuine. I know that she collects a certain type of little, it's a knickknack. Now she likes to collect that particular thing. And then I was in a store. I was actually traveling, and I was in a store and I saw this ceramic little representation of what she likes to collect. I mean, that particular, it's a certain fruit that she likes to have different, like little statues or little pictures of it. And then I go, oh, wow. And I bought it and I mailed it to her just because I really thought about her, because I was in the store. I go like, oh, wow. And that created such a great effect because it was real. I was thinking about her because I go, oh yeah, I know she likes it, but I knew she liked it. So, and I remembered it. So that just makes it very personal, because then I could write, oh, I was thinking about you. You probably would enjoy it. And she would put it as part of her collections and always look at it and think of me, which is,
yeah.
So I have a question, John. This is one of the clarifying questions. So obviously, I mean, well, maybe not obviously, but do you buy presents for your wife on Valentine's and her birthday?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
I mean, so personally, you may do things for your, like, I say no ABCs, no anniversary, birthday, Christmas. But personally, like, there are, like, in an interpersonal relationship, I have 4 daughters that they get Christmas gifts, right? But I also do the other times throughout the year of like, hey, I'm just like thinking about you, and here's something. And the upside of the surprise and delight versus the expected obligatory, like for your spouse, significant other, your kids, there may be certain relationships that you're going to do, the ABC gifting and break the rule because it's personal versus business. But in business,
you're not going to you don't send Christmas presents.
No, I don't send Christmas presents. I send things, but it doesn't mean I still do things, once a year. Like, I plan out for our top relationships, and we'll send things out 2 to 4 times a year intentionally. The frequency of, if you're gifting, if you're dropping artifacts to prospects, which I don't necessarily recommend, frequency has to go up, the intensity has to go up. But if you're taking care of your core relationships, referral partners, 2 to 4 times a year, once a quarter at the most. Otherwise, it starts to feel like it's automated. But yeah, no. And we went from Christmas, and then we're like, oh, we're going to do Valentine's Day. Well, that's different. But when you send it on Valentine's Day, what does that feel like? It feels like marketing, right? It's like, oh, we were creative, but now, like, I'm part of, like, their marketing funnel for Valentine's Day is like the marketing funnel. Whereas if I send something to somebody on a random Tuesday, in the middle of March, and it was just because of the relationship, I could actually send a thoughtful thing to a larger audience. I could systematize it and say, hey, I'm going to send this cool artifact. I'm going to personalize with their family name, make it all about them, handwritten note. But now I can deploy something. I have some clients that will do this for. We're sending dozens, hundreds, or thousands of things, the same thing. But because it shows up on a random Tuesday in the middle of October, it's not tied to a deal or a transaction. It's personalized with their family name, and it's all about them with a handwritten note. the goal is to make each person make it one-to-one versus make it feel like, oh, they had a bunch of stuff, swag in their closet on Valentine's Day and they wanted to send some stuff out to be cute. There's nothing wrong with being cute, but my goal is not to do just creative touches. It's to like, I want things to land and hit hard, right? Because as an entrepreneur, we don't have as much capital to deploy as a publicly traded company. So when I put $1 in, I want impact. I don't want them to think about me for 5 minutes. I want them to think about me or my client that's doing this for 5 years, for 15 years. And you get somebody thinking about you daily for 15 years, that doesn't come accidentally because you sent like, a little cute, little figurine to put on their desk. Now, if they collected something and that's their thing and you send them that's an artifact. That's not a cute little thing. That's like tied to them as a human. And that's something that they collect and they're really passionate about. That's a whole different ballgame. And so to me, being able to understand like the psychology of how we're wired as humans and being able to tap into that, that's where there's real leverage and power.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what would you say are the return? What is the return on the relationship? Like, what have you seen some measurable examples of how this had an effect on small to medium-sized businesses?
Yeah. So one of the guys, he probably has 20 employees. He's one of the top financial advisor coaching companies. So not a huge company, but in that little industry, in that niche, he's really big. And he's got 250 7-figure earners that are clients, financial advisors that coach with him. And I remember I met him at an event, and when I told him what I did, it was like this, expensive mastermind, like $20,000, $30,000 to be there. We spent an hour together. At the end of it, he's like, John, I've been in this industry for like 35 years. I've been in private equity. This is cute. I don't think your generosity gifting agency thing, I'm sure it works, but it wouldn't work in my industry. So I start sending him thoughtful artifacts. A team found out his wife's name is Jan. So his name's John. We send him, some knives, some leather goods, but we included Jan every single time for like 4 months. This went on, and 6 months go by. I saved his number on his phone, calls me. He's like, John, I got your, I met you at this event. I told you your stuff wouldn't work in my industry. And then you start sending stuff. And I thought it was cool, but I forgot about it 5 minutes after we arrived. And 3 months ago, we're getting ready to go to bed. My wife, Jan, is like, hey, have you done anything with John Ruhlin lately? And he's like, no, I wasn't really planning on it. And went about the night. A week goes by. We're getting ready to have lunch. My wife brings her name up again. And he's like, this happened like 6 times in the last 6 weeks. It's like, I feel like I'm sleeping with your sales rep. Like my wife, Jan's never met you and she just keeps talking about you. He's like, well, he's like, so would this work in my industry? I said, if you follow the recipe. Of course, he didn't want to follow the recipe. He wanted to send a bunch of crap at his big conference. I'm like, we're going to mail something ahead of time. And I said, we got to include the spouses. He's like, I don't know the spouses' names. I'm like, you have mostly like 99% of your guys is dudes that are married. I'm like, if you don't get their spouses' names, we won't. So he fights me back and forth. We do the program. And at the end, I don't recommend this, but he asked for referrals. And for them, an increase in 5% of referrals would be a big deal because their lifetime value of a client is like 6 figures. And he's like, John, we triple checked the numbers. We did this event 5 years in a row at the same place in San Francisco, the same Hyatt, basically the same food, just some different speakers. Nothing's changed other than we did, this, rich relationship, deployment, Giftology. And he's like, our referrals went up 110% over any year we've ever engaged. And he's like, I don't understand why it worked. I'm like, he's like, these guys could have afforded what I sent them 100 times over. And I said, you modeled and showed them and for sure showed their spouse because you included them that like, this wasn't a transactional relationship. You're pouring into the family. And that's the whole, like when people are not rational, humans are not rational. We're emotional. We make decisions emotionally and then we justify logically. And I said, you deployed and showed up for that person and made them the hero to their spouse, and their spouse now wants to know about you and all these other things. And I said, that's why it worked, not the thing, the knife, the wine tool, the whatever it is. And that's just the delivery vehicle for the emotion. Yes, it needs to be best in class and first class and fourth class, but you're not going to send anything to those people that they couldn't buy for themselves. So you better have a good story, meaning, thoughtfulness packaged with that. Or else you're just sending stuff that's going to, like, who cares? Everybody's got Amazon boxes out the wazoo showing up with stuff. you want to connect with a human, there's a different recipe for that. And so, everybody wants their referrals to go up 110%, but they don't have a plan that they're executing that follows the full recipe. They try to shortcut it, they try to hack it, they do it half-baked. And then they're pissed. They're like, I didn't get the results. I'm like, well, of course you didn't get the results. Like, you didn't go deeper to connect to that emotional, and that sounds woo-woo and whatever else, but there is a system, there's a process. And if you consistently, now there are times where you're going to do this and get nothing. Why? Because you're dealing with emotional beings that are not rational. But I've never had anybody that's committed to doing this for 3 years, whether with us doing it with them and for them, or with them doing it on their own. Where I had somebody reach out from Australia, a few years ago, that was like, they just did one relationship, invested, I think it was $1,000, which was a lot for them for one relationship. And they came back and were like, John, this produced 6 figures for us. So 100x ROR, one relationship. Why?
Okay.
It was like this. It was personalized. It was cool. It was unique. It was a surprise. All these things. It unlocked the relationship because they followed the principles and they did it on their own. Like, if you have 1 or 2 relationships to take care of, you don't need an agency. You need to read the book, understand the plan, and make sure that you don't cut corners and you follow through on it. And my recommendation would be, don't do it once. Do like what we did with Cameron. Show up every quarter for a decade, or even 3 years. Show up for 3 years and come back to me and say the relationship didn't blossom and flourish. You do that consistently for 10 relationships. Maybe 5 of them are not producing, but the other 5 are like, you plant the acorn, you get the oak tree. You're like, holy crap. Like, you can't handle like what's coming from it. And that's the power of the consistency and follow through, and not just making it like, I want to be generous this week, and then I'm going to go back to being like a Scrooge. Like, that's not, then it wasn't who you are. Like, you were just trying to do it tactically. And if you do that, like, people can read between the lines and be like, oh, they're just trying to manipulate. That doesn't play out real well.
Absolutely. And John, we're getting to the end of the podcast, but the takeaways here is that you have to be yourself. You have to care about others, and you really have to know others, because it's, again, you are gifting those people things that they for sure can buy for themselves, but you're showing them that you know them, you appreciate them, you're thinking about them, and they're important. And I think that is a key here to success, is that you care and they are important. I can also, in personal life, like, I had a friend that was in a store and I saw this purse, right? And it was totally her. It wasn't that expensive, but it was her colors, and I knew she would enjoy it. Yeah, can she buy it herself? And I could have just texted her and say, hey, check out this link and you can buy it online, right? But instead I go like, you know what, I'm just going to buy it and give it to her. And it was so meaningful because she was like, wow, this is amazing. My colors, exactly my style, this, and this. It just goes a long ways, because it tells the person, you are important to me and I appreciate you. And, I am grateful that you're in my life. All those things go such a long way. And the fact that you codified it and systematized it is amazing. So if people want to know more, I know you gave the website to download in terms of the don't do, what you don't do. How can they get a hold of you so you and the Giftology team can help them put this plan into actuality?
Yeah, I mean, we're on all the different social channels. Our main website is Giftology Group, Giftology, Giftology, giftologygroup.com. And whether it's speaking, consulting, or the done-for-you services on the agency side, that's the best place to kind of start. There's some free resources there. Obviously, the book lays out. There's no Giftology 2.0 that we hold back. Like, we give away everything. Because it's not that anybody can do this. It's usually organizations that are trying to scale and have dozens or hundreds or thousands of relationships is really where you need an agency. If you're a small company that's doing, $1 million a year, like, or $500,000 a year, like, you don't need agency. Take the free resources and start doing something. Like, start writing down, if you have a gratitude journal or whatever else, like, just write a list of the people that have gotten you to where you're at business-wise and life-wise. And then whether it's a handwritten note, a video, an artifact, like, just start taking action, because gratitude people are like, everybody wants to say that I have so much gratefulness and gratitude. And I'm like, well, cool. you realize half of those word is action, like doing, like feeling something and then not doing something is very inauthentic. It's not real. Like go, whether it's picking up the phone and talking to them or sending them a video or taking an hour and writing a handwritten note, like go freaking do something about it. And then if you can do that every day, you know, like 1, 2, 3 people in the course of a year, like you'll have impacted some people because you didn't just feel the gratitude, you actually showed the gratitude. And that's where I think people like, they get hung up and they're like, oh, I'll do this when I have more money. And I'm like, you don't need money. You need like thoughtfulness to put the list together and then thoughtfulness to actually execute on it and go do something with it. And you do that over the course of a year, like relationships will start to shift. You'll start to shift. So it's not like so many people are like, John, I'll do this when I make, you know, when I'm at a, you know, an 8-figure level or when I make this much money. I'm like, you're dumb. Like you won't get there unless you have relationships. And unless you show up for those relationships, they're not going to, like, you won't have people on your team and in your corner. So I can't emphasize enough. This isn't go, you know, buy Rolexes. Like if you're in a position to do that and you want to do that, cool. But I guarantee, like, if you take the time to just even write handwritten notes that are really thoughtful and go read them to the people that you care about, you're going to cry. They're going to cry. There's all kinds of studies and research that show how powerful just the act of doing that can be for you and for them. And I think, you know, in 2024, with everything digital, people are craving like real connection and not in a woo-woo way, like in a real way. Like this is just very simple how we're wired as humans. It's how God's wired us. So that's my, you know, more than going and checking out the website or anything else, like that's cool, but you don't need the website. You just need to go start taking action on it.
Agreed. John, thank you so much for being a guest on this podcast. This has been a fantastic interview. I got a lot of takeaways. I learned more about Giftology, and I'm sure our listeners as well. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.